and the University of Oxford. So do we want to get started? Shall I share my screen, or are we waiting for some more people to join? All good. All right, let's see now. I will jump in. Hang on. All right. Oh, can everyone see that poll? It's a bit annoying. Okay.
Yes, everything is okay.
Okay, perfect. Then I will get started. So just to run through kind of the structure of the session today, I'm going to start by just giving a quick intro to the context of the UK care system. So happy to answer any questions on that. I'm not going to spend loads of time on it, but just to kind of give us the overall context. I'm going to talk to you about what Bright Spots is, the aims and how we work with local authorities, to go into a little bit of depth on the national findings, what we have heard from children and young people through the life of the project. We have a lot of data, so I've been asked to kind of specifically hone in on the relationships between children and their workers, but happy to answer questions at the end on kind of any other aspects of the research or anything else that we've found out. And I want to close by giving some examples of how local authorities we've worked with have used the Bright Spots findings to make life better for the children and young people that they work with. Just so I'm going to be talking obviously for quite a while, but just to give some pointers, some nudges. I want you to think of this webinar as a time to reflect on what you hear. How do the findings relate to the work that you do? How do you feel about what you're hearing? Feel free to put any thoughts or ideas down in the chat if you want to, and we'll pick it up. It's we're kind of a smallish group, so I think we'll be able to sort of chat more freely when we come back. We stress with Bright Spots that yes, it's a research project, but it's action research. So we want to listen to what children and young people have to say and then use it to implement change. So what do you want to change? What are things that you can do in your work to make life better for the children and young people you work with? And to think of this session as not a lecture, but as opening up a conversation. So leaving you with more questions than answers, more roads to go down, more kind of avenues to explore. So just starting, as I said, with the context for the UK. The latest figures show that we have over 100,000 children and young people in care. So children are in care up to the age of 18. Most of those young people are in Scotland. The most common form of foster care is being with a foster family. So about 3/4 of children who go into care go to live with a foster parent or foster family, and about 1 in 10 also go into living in residential care, so children's homes, and they are sometimes specialized children's homes for children and young people with special needs and disabilities, or sometimes kind of residential care for other reasons. The main reason for young people going into care is abuse and neglect, or family dysfunctions and being under acute stress. So children are taken into care as a last resort to ensure their well-being. Their wishes and feelings have to be taken into account legally, and it has to be considered the impact on their well-being of being taken away from their family. Arrangements are slightly different from local authority to local authority. But when you leave care, normally around between ages 16 to 18, you still receive a service, you still receive support from your local authority. Requirements for collecting and reporting data on this age group is not as strict as for children in care. So we know that there are around 40,000 what we call care leavers aged 17 to 21, but reporting requirements end at age 21, but young people are still entitled to a leaving care service from their local authority up to the age of 25. Leaving care services, like children's services, are run by local governments, so local councils. Similarly for care leavers as for children in care, the state has parental responsibility. They are what's called the corporate parent. But services are slightly more flexible for this cohort. So some services in some local authorities are contracted out to charities and are not run sort of in-house by the local authority. Yeah, but starting with, so just looking at how we fit into this, what is the Bright Spots program? I just want to talk about how the project came about, what it is we measure. So we measure what's called subjective well-being, and there are a few different models for subjective well-being, and we have created our own. So we'll talk through what we call the Bright Spots well-being indicators and what we looked at in the surveys before starting to look at what we've actually found out. The Bright Spots program started as a question in 2013, so before I joined. We wanted to know where in the UK children in care were flourishing, where were they doing really well. And we found that we weren't really able to answer that question because that data wasn't really being collected. So Bright Spots looks, as I said, at subjective well-being. So feeling good within yourself, but also doing well interpersonally. So in the relationships that you have with other people. We use two surveys to measure well-being. So we have Your Life, Your Care for children in care aged 4 to 18 years old. And it's one of the few surveys that really talks to children as young as 4. Often that cohort is data on them tends to be collected through parents or carers or teachers and so on. Your Life Beyond Care is the survey for care leavers, again, age 16 to 25. And was kind of thinking again about data collection in terms of the data that is collected locally and nationally on children in care and care leavers. They tend to focus on what we call outcomes measures. So things that are objective and clear and measurable. They tend to be based on what professionals think are important. So if you Google any local authority in the UK and ask, for statistics on looked after children, you can find out the average number of times a child in that local authority has changed placement. You can find out on average how well they do at school. You can find out the percentage who end up as teenage parents, who ends up going to prison while still in care, and so on. And those things are obviously important things to look at, but they don't tell you very much about how children are really feeling on their journey through care. Are they happy? Are they safe? Do they feel that they're doing well? And obviously, individual workers, individual foster carers will have that idea on the children who they are working with. But Bright Spots provides, it bridges that gap. It provides local authorities with the opportunities to systematically listen to their children in care and get an overarching idea about the things that are important to them in their own words. So it provides a different measure to kind of base your work on. Developing the surveys was a long and quite costly process, but the essence behind it is asking children and young people, what makes life good for you? Again, there are a few different ways of kind of thinking about subjective well-being, but it comes back to that holistic measure. Are you happy? Do you feel satisfied in your life? Do you feel that the things that you do are purposeful, meaningful, and how do you relate to the people around you? My kind of shorthand is, we're not asking, how are you doing? We're asking, how are you? So asking children to make their own assessment about what's going on for them in their lives. And it sounds like, I think, sometimes a bit of a vague or not very scientific measure, but actually looking at studies that have measured subjective well-being over time, we can see that having high subjective well-being early on in life is a very strong predictor for a lot of other indicators that are important for your quality of life. So your future mental health, physical health, how well you end up doing at school, the types of jobs that you end up doing. There's also evidence to show that people who have high subjective well-being are more confident, they have more energy, they're more creative and productive, they're better connected to the people around them, and even have stronger immune systems. So it's a rigorous measure that is important to look at. And as I said, speaking to children and young people, this is what we came up with, and all the questions were tested and approved by the children that we worked with on developing the surveys. So we look at the relationships, the people in young people's lives. Obviously, you know, most of these indicators, relationships, rights, recovery, resilience, will be important to all children, whether they're in care or not. But children in care have issues, obviously, that are specific to them. So relationships with your social worker and your foster carer, for example, the way that you interact with your family, your birth family, is quite different. So we ask questions about what we call family time or contact. Are you happy with how often you get to see your family? We ask questions about pets and friends. You know, children told us that a pet is someone who loves you unconditionally, someone who's always happy to see you. So it can be a very important relationship for children in care who maybe feel quite alien in being in a new family. I've put some quotes in from the survey just to kind of illustrate what the sort of things that young people say. So from this young person talking about their foster carers, I feel like they are my real family and they always will be. So demonstrating that kind of secure attachment, feeling very close and connected to their birth family. Talking about rights and entitlements, very often, I think this is where we really come up against that idea that systems are created by adults. And as much as we try to fit children into the system, it's not created with them in mind, particularly with the younger children. We get comments like this one. I think I may be adopted, but no one has really said. When will I know? Is the judge a nice person who will be able to see that my mom really tries? I think very good illustration of how confusing it is for a child to be taken away from home and to try and kind of relearn, try and understand why you were taken away from your home, what safe means, what settled means, what trusting somebody means, and also trying to understand all these policies and processes that you're suddenly going through. You know, a system needs to be able to explain to children in a way that they can understand why these things are happening and how it's going to happen. Looking at recovery, we're looking at the opportunities that children and young people have to recover from the often traumatic experiences that have led them into care, but also the trauma of being taken away from your family. So things like feeling settled and feeling happy where you are, liking your bedroom, being able to talk to the adults around you about the things that matter to you, feeling that your feelings are important and noticed. So this young person said, they treat me well, they know about my feelings, they drive me everywhere to see friends, they help with my schoolwork, I'm very happy. Resilience, the final indicator, is about the opportunities, the chances that young people have to prepare for independent living in the future, but also to explore and develop skills and abilities in their day-to-day life. So we ask about school, we ask whether they're supported in their education, but we also ask about having fun. Do you get to do your own hobbies? Do you get to play outside? Do you have access to the internet where you live so you can stay connected with the people who are important to you? And you get to practice life skills like you know, going to the bank or learning how to cook. I'm happy in the home I'm at. I get to do painting and coloring. I get to ride my bike with my flowery helmet. The model for care leavers is obviously looks very similar and looks at similar things. So the people in your life, the system around you, your emotional well-being, looking at living independently. But given that it's an older cohort, we obviously ask more about kind of the choices that you're making, the opportunities that you have, and we also kind of, the questions are a bit more nuanced. So when we ask about the people in your life, we ask about the qualities of those relationships. Do you have someone who listens to you, someone who tells you when you've done well? Do you have someone who believes in you? Sometimes I get depressed, but not as much as I used to. Engaging with others has helped. And when it comes to kind of rights and entitlements, we know that the leaving care PA, so the kind of the equivalent of the social worker, is a very important relationship for young people. So we ask a lot about their relationship with their leaving care PA. One young person has said, it's been really important for me to have someone who listens and understands my past and supports me with what I want to do in the future. So an example of the system working really well for this young person. When it comes to feelings and emotional well-being, we know that care leavers particularly are very vulnerable to loneliness and isolation. This young person has just said, I sit at home in silence. So what, which kind of leads me on to thinking about When we talk about living independently, yes, we're talking about having a roof over your head. Yes, we're talking about studying and working. We're talking about being safe where you live. But we're also talking about the ability to create a life for yourself that's going to be happy and fulfilling. So this young person says, I know how to live independent like surviving. I don't know how to live independent as in like being happy and living. So how, as a children's services department, do you think of that? What aspirations do you have for your young people to build a life that they feel really happy in, rather than getting lost in kind of safeguarding and making sure that the boxes are ticked and that the procedures are followed? So a little time to reflect, and kind of the first question that I want to ask while I take a sip of water: what makes your life good? If you were to kind of construct that model for yourself, what kind of things would go in it? Who are the people who make you happy? Are there particular places that you go that make you feel good? Are there things that you do that make you feel happy? And a follow-up to that question: in what way do you give children and young people who you work with opportunities to make their life good? How often do you have that conversation? When do you ask that question? So again, you can share that in the chat, or just, scribble something down on your page, and we can talk when we come back. But I want to just talk now about the national findings. So what have we found out in the course of the 5 or 6 years now that we've been collecting data? So I don't know if I said, but since the project started, we've gathered over 15,000 responses from children and young people. So it's now a very big study. And these national findings are from our latest 2 reports on children in care and care leaver. I'll link to our publications page on the final slide. So I have focused mainly in this presentation on relationships with social workers and leading care workers. So looking at stability, trust, and support. I want to look at understanding why you're in care, the rights and voice for children in care, and independence versus interdependence for care leavers. So starting with worker continuity. So kind of primary quality that you need in order to build a good relationship with someone is that they're permanent, that they stay there. So we ask, how many workers have you had in the last 12 months? And we see that for children in care, only about a third, just over a third, have kept the same social worker in the last year. For care leavers, that percentage is much higher. And actually, retention of leading care PAs tends to be better than for children in care. And that constant churn of social workers is something that young people comment on very frequently when we ask what could make things better for you. It's, this young person says, I wish I could have the same social worker because I've had more than 5. This is the 8 to 11 age group, because I've had more than 5 and they keep asking me the same questions. So a sense that even as a young child, you've become kind of a cog in the system. You have to keep repeating the same story again and again. There's nobody who really knows you, who to kind of guide you through the system and help you with the things that you need help with. Having said that, trust in social workers and leading care workers is quite high. It's 93% of the very youngest, 95% of 8 to 11-year-olds, and slightly lower, 87% for 11 to 18-year-olds. 96% of care leavers say that they trust their social worker or leaving care worker, at least sometimes. And when we created the surveys, trust really came up as the most significant quality that children felt were important for all of their relationships. You know, being able to count on someone, being able to depend on them, having someone that you can look to for help and support and advice is really a very important quality for children in care, given the kind of tumultuous lives that they often lead after coming into care. And I think what we see often in the comments from children and young people is that there is a disconnect between the standards that we set for professionals who work with children and young people and what they themselves really want. He will call me regularly to check in with me and make sure that I'm okay, which makes me feel very secure. So you've found somebody there who doesn't wait for you to call, who doesn't wait for a crisis to develop, but who regularly just checks in and says, is everything all right? How are you feeling right now? This young person says, my social worker is the sweetest person. She's absolutely amazing. And she always asks me how I'm feeling about certain things and ensures that everything is going smoothly. And what we hear from young people time and time again is, I want someone who cares about me. I want someone who is willing to go above and beyond to make sure that I'm all right. Someone who will continue to check in with me, even if I'm being difficult. And that really pays dividends. You know, the comments, which I can't fit in the presentation, about positive relationships with workers are really overwhelming. Children really appreciate that strong relationship with their social worker. So kind of continuing on that, we ask care leavers, who gives you emotional support? And this is quite a typical picture. So this is a national picture, but if you disaggregate and look at each local authority in turn, these two top options are always there. Friends always comes out on top, leaving care worker always comes out second. The second most important person in a young person's life is, in terms of emotional support, is their leaving care worker. Do you have a person who you trust, who helps you and sticks by you no matter what? This question is asked of children in care as well, not just care leavers. And what we see here is that there's a drop as young people get older. So less than 1 in 20 of the 8 to 11-year-olds say that they don't have anyone who they trust. That comes up a little higher to just under 1 in 10 for 11 to 18-year-olds, but really drops down to 1 in 7 for the care leavers. So what happens as young people move through the system? Where do their support networks go? Where do they end up? And are we preparing young people for a life, for a time when we're not going to be there to support them anymore? This young person says, I haven't many people in my life. I've casual friends here and there, but my main source of emotional support is from my placement and leaving care and support workers. So is that an aspirational way of thinking about that young person's life? Are we thinking about helping them to develop the skills to make connections with new people, to form strong relationships, to understand what makes a good relationship and how to be a good friend, co-worker, and so on and so on. A question that I often ask with social workers, leaving care workers, is thinking about a young person who you are supporting right now. Try to imagine their 30th birthday party. Who is going to be there for your young person on that day? Does that person exist now? If so, how can you help them to hold on to that person? And if not, how can you help them to build those connections? for the future. Remembering that's the aim, what makes a good life. I want to look at quickly as well the findings around understanding why you're in care. So for children in care, we ask, has an adult explained to you why you are in care? And for care leavers, we ask, has someone explained why you were in care? The bar that we want to look at is the yellow. So yes, someone has explained to me. And for the youngest, only about half say that they've had an explanation as to why they are in care. Now, if you ask the adults who work with them, they will probably give a very different answer to that question. But people sometimes ask me, well, why is that important? Or are these conversations not upsetting to children, or can we not assume that they know? And actually, what we know from research is that, firstly, having an understanding of your personal history is key to building a strong sense of identity, a strong sense of self in later life. Secondly, we know that when there are gaps in understanding for a child, they tend to fill in those gaps by blaming themselves. So we can't assume that because they've lived the experience, they also, they know exactly what's happened. Also the reason why we phrase the question in that way, has an adult explained to you, rather than do you know why you're in care? Because many children would answer, well, I know that I was difficult, I was naughty, so that's why I was taken away. This is often a confusing question for children, because they may have had the conversation with their social worker or their foster care or somebody else, but they may, if they have a relationship with their birth family, they may get a very different version of events. So this child says, Mommy says the social worker is not here to be a friend, she's here to take you. So how do we help children make sense of the conflicting stories that they are being told, and develop their own sense of what has happened and how they feel about that? This young person says, I would like someone to talk to me about my feelings and tell me about my past. I'd like to see a picture of my dad so I know what he looks like. I'd like to see a picture of me as a baby. I've never seen a picture of me. I have a lot of questions that no one answers. Looking as well at the kind of more rights and entitlements part, and again, thinking about what is it like to be a child who has come into the care system. A key issue that comes up for young people is the stigma of being in care. We ask them, do adults do things to make you feel embarrassed about being in care? And about 1 in 8 say that that is an issue for them. We ask, do you feel included in decisions that social workers make about your life? About 1 in 7 say that they do not feel included. And the sorts of issues that children bring up when we ask them to kind of develop this idea of being included and of being stigmatized. Children will say things like, it's embarrassing to worry about what other people might think when they find out that I'm in care. So even though we try to emphasize with children that going into care was not your fault, there's still a mismatch between that picture and the response that children get from people around them. There's still an assumption that children go into care because they're troubled or they're difficult or their behavior is bad. And that is still something that young people suffer from a lot. Doctors, school, everyone knows I'm in care. Why hold meetings where everyone can see? Again, that idea of your own narrative, but in this sense, being allowed to hold on to your own story, for you to be the person who decides, who knows what's happened to you, who gets to share in the intimate details of your life. The sorts of things that children bring up are things like adults drawing attention to your care status in front of others. So teachers calling it out in front of the class, or foster carers referring to you as their foster daughter in front of other people. Social workers turning up to pick them up at school and wearing their ID badge so that everybody can see that you're being picked up by a professional. Young people talk a lot about having to be pulled out of class to have meetings. And with all these things, the kind of key thread that runs through is, why are these things being done? They're not being done maliciously. They're not being done to hurt children specifically, but they're being done because we haven't started with the question, what makes life good for children in care? How are we listening to our young people? How are we understanding what is important to them? So being pulled out of class to have meetings, that might make sense because the social worker has a slot on that day at that time. Okay, fine. So then they will have a meeting at that time. But maybe, you know, if we had thought about the impact that that has on a young person, we would say, actually, it's better to do that outside of class, where they don't have to have that attention drawn to them. So thinking about what happens when young people leave care. So again, starting from age, so around 16, it depends a bit where you are. Around 45% of care leavers nationally are what we refer to in the UK as NEET. So NEET stands for not in education, employment, or training. That is significantly higher than for young people the same age who have not grown up in care. We also see that there is a steep decline in overall well-being when young people leave care, when the support systems that they had in care are not fully, but partially removed. We talk about a cliff edge of care, coming to the cliff and falling off. So overall well-being is nearly halved for young people who have left care. Young people themselves, again, you know, this quote, I know how to live independent like surviving. I don't know how to live independent as in like being happy and living. It comes back again to that idea of what are our aspirations? What is the plan for when the young person is no longer with us, when we can no longer support them? How do we want them to think about their lives? How do we want to plan with them now? How to create a good life for them in the future. This young person who's still in care said, I'm nervous about leaving care because in our lesson at school on homelessness, they told us that if you're in care, you're likely to end up on the street. It makes me worried because I don't want that. So do all professionals who work with young people have an awareness of those fears, of those worries that young people have? How do we talk to young people about that? And how do we emphasize the narrative that says, I believe in you, and I want for you to have a happy life, a good life later on in life? We do know, though, that those conversations can make a difference. Looking at overall low well-being, there's a great degree of variance across the local authorities that we've worked with. So the average for young people having low well-being is about 30%, which is quite high. But in the best performing local authority that we've worked with, 6 out of 7 have moderate to high well-being. So there's great degree of variance across the scale. And that difference is very often in having that one key person, someone who listens to you, someone who tells you when you've done well, someone who believes that you're going to do well later on in life. This young person says, since being in university, I've had a massive amount of help from my local authority. And it's been great having someone to talk to if things are confusing or if I'm not sure about what I want to do in the future. So again, that relationship as corporate parent, meaning that yes, young people are moving through to independence, but they may still need your support. They may still need someone to check in with from time to time when things get difficult, even though they have left care. So another kind of reflection question, thinking about the children and young people you support, how often do you talk to them about what makes life good for them? And do you have a clear idea of what their best life would look like in your planning with them, in your work with them? Is that a vision that you're working towards? And in what ways are you supporting the aspirations and goals that they have? So looking at time, I know I'm running over a little bit. I apologize, that often happens. I just want to kind of give a few quick examples of how local authorities have used the findings before I come back. So looking at kind of shifting our perspective based on listening to children and young people's voices. The first example that I want to give actually comes out of the first ever survey that we ran, and this is very common. Taking the register at school is standard practice, and what sometimes happens is children in care will have a little notice or a little indicator in some way next to the register. Obviously, that is confidential information and should not be shared with anyone outside of the staff. This young person said in the survey, I hate that when the register comes up on the screen and others in the class can see that I'm a CLA. So CLA stands for Child Looked After. It winds me up. I don't like to be different. So this young person was having to sit and be reminded in front of everybody every single day that they were different from their classmates. And what the local authority did when they saw this is they picked up the phone, they called all of the schools that they work with and said, this practice has to stop. This is not acceptable. This is not how we work with our young people. So without really, often when we talk about children's social care, we talk about a lack of money and a lack of resources, which I think is true everywhere. But I think this example shows in a very powerful way that listening to children and young people can create that shift from that apathy of this is what we've always done, so I don't see what the problem is, to we never do this. It's not acceptable for our children. We need to listen to what they have to say and how that impacts how they feel about their lives. Another local authority that we worked with have also wanted to target children's experience of stigma and did a really interesting piece of work where they very much turned things on their head and allowed their children to go out and teach professionals and teachers what the best way was to talk to them about being in care. They created a little video that to give some top tips on things not to say to kids in care. And it was a very powerful piece of work. It was done with a small group of children, but it was rolled out across the whole local authority and led to some really key changes. For example, holding meetings outside of school and making sure that health assessments were held during the holidays so that children didn't have to be taken out of school to go to the doctor. Another really wonderful example of emphasizing well-being and happiness and not waiting for young people to get to a place of crisis is this example of a community allotment. So Isle of Wight, which is the local authority in question, is a very beautiful area, but they had found that actually a lot of young people were saying they weren't going out in nature regularly. So they did some community fundraising and got this space for an allotment where they grow vegetables and flowers, and any young person who is looked after by the local authority, whatever their age, can come there and learn skills to do with gardening and horticulture. They've made it accessible by having raised sort of flower beds for young people who are in a wheelchair. And it's created an opportunity for people to socialize and learn and meet other people and make new connections in a really simple, really lovely way. That's been a very successful project. Again, with the Isle of Wight, a lot of their young people, when we did their survey, reported that they didn't feel safe where they were living. They didn't feel settled. They didn't feel that where they were living was right for them. So they decided to get young people involved in commissioning their next accommodation providers and ensuring that accommodation that was given to young people was fit for purpose. Young people co-hosted a information session for accommodation providers who were bidding to provide housing to the local authority. They looked at the applications that came in and felt, I think, really empowered by being included in that quite complex decision-making, actually making an impact at a strategic level. Again, I think a really powerful example of what can happen if you allow young people to take part in the decisions that are being made about their lives. And final example that is quite new, it started this year. So St. Helens is a local authority in the north of England, and they've made all kinds of different changes to their services, but they wanted to really drill down into that idea of listening to children. So they put a call out to everybody who works with children and young people across all of children's services and said anybody can join this group, which we're going to call the Voice of the Child Champions. So everyone from administrators to social workers to at whatever kind of level of seniority was allowed to join. The group meets once a month and they look at all areas of practice and look at where is the voice of the child not seen? Where are we not listening to children? And keeping on reminding everybody, listening to children is core work. It's not something we do on the side. It's not something we do as a occasional exercise. It's not a tick box. It's really something that we need to do in all areas of our work. And again, it's been very successful and has prompted case studies being written by specialists across the department that are being used to train and kind of facilitate professional development for workers across the social care team. So yeah, I'm going to come back to you now. Sorry, I have run over a little bit and I apologize for that. But I will end with my standard question. What is one thing that you want to do differently to make life better for the children and young people that you work with? And just a prompt, if you come up with something really good, what will you do to remind yourself of that commitment? So are you going to bring it up in a meeting? Are you going to talk to someone you know? Are you going to make a sticky note, which is what I do, and put it somewhere where you can see it every day? What is your commitment going to be, and how are you going to make sure that you stick to it? I just wanted to flag our website, the Bright Spots website. Our publications and reports that I've talked about today are on the website. And also the practice examples that I talked about and many, many more are on the practice plan. So do please check that out. And now I am going to come back to you. So happy to take any questions. Sorry again for running.
No, everything is okay. It was really interesting. For now, we don't have any question in chat, but for now. But there are 13 of us, so maybe the participants can ask live some questions.
That would be great. Oh, it would be nice to see everybody as well. If people want to kind of put their videos back on. Nice.
Great. It's always better to see who's with us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, were there any kind of initial reactions? Feel free to kind of answer face-to-face or put something in the chat if you want to. Be really interesting to hear. It's not that often that I talk to people outside of the UK of the project. It'd be interesting to hear what people think. I've only got one lady's face that I can see. Might just poke you and get you to say something.
It's okay. But I have actually one comment and one question. Something I remember during your really great presentation, and I still have the same impression, and it happened like years ago. I worked for like 10 years with young people from alternative care, and when I talk to friends who have nothing to do with this profession, I have one friend, and she said, well, yes, this is some kind of invisible group. Yeah, children and young people from alternative care, and despite a lot of programs and projects being implemented here in Croatia for that group, I still think the same. They are very invisible. And when we talk about the UK, it's 40,000 young people and children, which is a really big number. And actually, my question is, during my work, I was most interested in advocacy activities. And we did a big analysis of public policies, social policies for young people from alternative care for 3 areas: education, housing, social inclusions, and employment. And of course, nothing happened after that. And how do you work with your government and some advocacy activities?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. That's really interesting. So I think my project kind of exists in 2 different arenas. So there's the work that I do with, or that my team do with local authorities, which I think is kind of more direct because you get to know the people and you can have kind of more open conversations. We also have a kind of national lobbying arm, which I think is more sort of what you're kind of getting at there. And I mean, yeah, national change takes a long time. It's very challenging often to affect things on a national level. But I think it's a question of keeping the research relevant and approachable. And also looking for any opportunities for conversations that you have. So we have a couple of connections in the Department for Education, for example. So we know when new consultations are coming up. There's just been a big review of children's social care in the UK. And because we now have so much research and so much data that is both, going back quite a while, but or going back sort of 5 or 6 years, but also like up to the minute, we could very quickly say, we have all this data. We want to play a part in this. So I'm not sure if I'm really answering the question, but I think it's also something that I've really seen over the years is that the local change slowly begins to beget national change. Like the example that always comes to my mind is, as I said, about pets, and like how pets are, like having a pet is so important to children. And when I started this job, people would say, why do you ask about pets? Why is that relevant? Like, we don't ever ask if children like pets, or like if, you know, it's not something that is involved in matching. And now, piece by piece, you know, you're slowly seeing more programs like, you know, children like, you know, joining a, you know, dog walking scheme, or being taken to sort of urban farms to spend time with animals and that kind of thing. It's also increasingly becoming something that's asked about when foster carers are matched with their foster children. So it's sort of, even though we've not managed to you know, we've not managed to create a policy change, we've managed to shift slowly the conversation to increase awareness that this is actually something that's really important to children and young people.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I think sometimes that people don't understand this sensitive meaning of like having a pets or things like that. And I was very disappointed after everything 10 years ago. We did very quality analysis. Lots of people, lots of professionals was included. And like a few months ago, I get email with one poll to answer the same questions. You know, it was like, why? We have everything.
This is often the criticism that we get. You know, children in care are so over-surveyed. And I think it's also because it's a different sort of skill set. Like knowing how to create a good survey, a good piece of research, and rolling that out is a very different skill set from making policy change and actually understanding what happens on the ground. So I think that if you're creating a research project, you really need to start, and this is also what we've learned, because some of the local authorities that we worked with early on, they did the research and then they said, oh, okay, thank you very much. This has been so important to listen. And then nothing happened. So now what we do is we start by talking to senior management before we've done anything and said, these are the things that you're probably going to find out. How is that going to work? Like, how is that going to impact the work that you're doing at the moment? Could it feed into your theory of change? Could it feed into your improvement plan? Are you creating you know, are you writing a fundraising proposal? Could you use the statistics in that? So kind of is trying to make the research more alive for people and more relevant. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I agree. And we have another comment in chat. Hello, I work in the association play. Everybody, I say hi to everybody in association play. On a post-treatment program with young people from alternative care. I'm currently on maternity leave. Excellent results on trust in social workers. I don't think we would have such high percentages. I don't know if it's because of the different way of working, model, better organization. I agree with my colleague from Play, Association Play.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think we feel very happy and proud, obviously, that so many children seem to trust their social worker. But I wonder sometimes, like thinking about that quote from the young person who said, I don't really have any friends, I just have the people, you know, who work with me professionally. Like, trusting your social worker is a really great place to start. But what is hidden underneath that? Because ultimately, I guess we want to build to a place where you don't need your social worker so much anymore, and you feel ready to move on rather than being kind of thrust out of the system. But yeah, I mean, well, that's not really a question, I suppose. But I guess it comes back to asking children, you know, what makes you trust somebody, or even asking yourself, what makes you trust somebody? If you have to trust them because there's nobody else, maybe, maybe that's not a great situation to be in. But what are the key things? Someone who's dependable, reliable, someone who takes the time to listen to you, someone who seems to really care about your feelings. And often those are not things that we ask about when we recruit a new social worker. I was really sorry. A local authority that I worked with recently got their children to write a list of what they wanted their local authority to do for them. Sort of a lot of local authorities have a pledge or promise to their young people, and this was a way of kind of turning it on its head. And the first thing that they put, the first requirement was love us. And I thought that was really powerful. It's easy to forget that that's when a child is taken away from their family, that's a really desperate thing. And being loved is really necessary, and not necessarily something that we talk about when it comes to providing a service.
And the colleague from Association Play also said, I agree. We also noticed that they have fewer friends, that they separate from people who negatively affect them and are left without the old society, the abusive partner.
Yeah. I mean, as I'm not sure what age you're talking about there, but that's, we know from other studies as well that children in care are more likely to be bullied and are less likely to have, we ask, do you have one really good friend? And that's a lot lower than for children in the general population. So are schools tasked with asking children about their friendships, and are they supporting young people to make new friends, providing activities where they can interact with other young people in an unstructured kind of healthy way? As if you have to move a young person to a new placement, do you ask them, so who's your close friend? Who do you want to stay in touch with?
Of course, So it's 4 minutes.
Yes.
Any questions?
I always run over a little bit, but please let me know if there are any other questions or anything, any comments, even anything you want me to take away, anything I can kind of improve on or I should have talked more about. Well, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, of course. So I think it is for today. We are over now.
Yes.
And I will just make one little poll. Just a second. No, stop sharing. Relaunch. Just a second. No, we will be.
From the start.
I just want to share a poll for feedback, but I have some technical problems. Just a second, please. Sorry. Oh, here it is. Okay. And now you can see our feedback poll.
Oh God, that feels a bit brutal. All right, I'll remove my face so you don't have to look at me while you're answering.
No, please take a second to give us a feedback. It's really important to us. And if you want to receive a certificate of attending this webinar, please write to this email. I will put it in the chat. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.